In this video, we're going to have an extremely brief look at what mental models are. In all likelihood, I would do at least one more or a number of videos over time about what mental models are, because they're pretty important in cognitive science. If you haven't so far, I recommend you watch my video on indirect perception, because that establishes the importance of mental models. What I'm going to do in this video, though, is to highlight the issue, the definition of a mental model. And as far as I can understand, this was first really established and fleshed out by Kenneth Craik in 1943 in a book called The Nature of Explanation. And so I'm going to attempt to read this ridiculously long sentence. If the organism carries a small-scale model of external reality and of its own possible actions within its head, it is able to try out various alternatives, conclude which is the best of them, react to future situations before they arise, utilize the knowledge of past events in dealing with the present and the future, and in every day react in a much fuller, safer, and more competent manner to the emergencies which face it. So I did manage to read out that sentence without passing out. I think it's a really interesting one. So we've got this notion of an organism in the world. Could be a person, could be a cat, whatever it may be. And the idea builds upon indirect perception, in that we have our own internal mental model, and specifically he's talking about this small scale model here. The proposal isn't that we have a model of the entire world in our brain. Rather, we would have kind of small models about how the world works that might be called into play at any one moment. There are many, many places in this world that I have never been or even heard about. And so I certainly do not have models of those in my mind. But let's take an example of, if I am reading a book, the author could describe the characters, the places that they're in. The idea is that based upon my experience and the words, I would be able to build a mental model of the world conveyed in the book in my own head. And so Kenneth Craik here is basically saying that you can use this small-scale model, or in fact multiple small-scale models, in order to do things and in order to explore with. So everyone will have had times where they have kind of mentally simulated a set of events in their head. Maybe they did something regretful, and then they replay this event in their mind. And so in the language of mental models, they would essentially be using a mental model of the situation that they're thinking about. And they would be using this in order to kind of simulate. You could ask, what if I had said this, rather than that? What do I think will happen? And so this is the kind of thing that Kenneth Craik is getting at. The idea that we have these little models, these little kind of things in our minds which we're able to use. They might represent knowledge and information, but they can actually be used perhaps to simulate and to predict. So that's it for my very brief look at mental models. I unfortunately have not read this full book, and I think it would be quite difficult if all sentences were that long. But if you were going to look into this, there's essentially a review written 40 years later by Richard Gregory. So if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about Kenneth Craik's ideas about mental models, I think maybe the first point would be looking at this review, which is just a handful of pages long.